the fact that I'm getting pissed on video funny, or what? I'm curious.
Men rights.
Oh, that is funny. Okay, that's fair. Men's rights is fucking hilarious.
Why?
Because it's so fucking stupid, I want to gag.
I like to try and think the best of people, so I'm going to assume ignorance on your part rather than just simple malice. To make this a little easier on you, I'm going to even the tables somewhat through the course of this video. Given that, I am still not going to be holding back, because your video was ridiculous.
It's hilarious that people actually can open their goddamn face holes and say the words that relate to this fucking topic. Like, oh, men's rights, we're oppressed. Fuck your fucking fuck and all of the fuck related to it.
How stunningly articulate of you.
The only time white male landowners have been oppressed is never. Fuck you. You were never oppressed.
Okay, so here's a picture of some of these white male wealthy landowners who Bobo's talking about supporting the MRM. Now yeah, we are still over 50% white males, but there's still plenty of blacks, Mexicans, women, transgendered, gay, straight, poor, middle-class people, all who support our goals. Race has nothing to do with it. The problems which affect men affect all races. Now, wealthy landowners and their wives make up a tiny fraction of the population. That's like saying, black rights? Fuck off. Why do rich sports stars and rappers need extra rights? We're not saying that there's not enough in us in high power where, that's feminist domain. We're more concerned about the people at the bottom. Victims of violent crime, suicide victims, the homeless, those falsely accused, those who have no access to support in domestic violence cases, all overwhelmingly male. Bobo, I left your intro in there just to show that either you weren't so drunk that you couldn't operate your video editing software, or that you sobered up, then edited the video, and still thought it was a good idea to release this crap. Either way, you've still got some accountability here. You can't use, oh, I was drunk as an excuse for this pile of horseshit.
So we have this whole thing that's happening out there in the wide, wide world of the internet, which is, as we all know, a collection of where everybody and anybody can say what they want, no matter how ridiculous or retarded it is. Now, when we have this issue of men's rights, right, oh, women are getting... Fuck it, I'm not even going to start with that whole bullshit of where I try to paraphrase what they're saying, because it's just going to make me more angry.
I'm guessing you can't paraphrase what we have to say because you haven't watched any of our videos. Now, my guess is that you've probably heard the words men's rights and immediately assumed the worst, like I probably would if someone said white rights to me, because white people have had it historically better than black people, for example. So yeah, I can sort of understand why you may just automatically assume the worst, because we've grown up in a society which basically pretends that men's issues don't exist and that women have had it worse in every single conceivable way throughout all of history. But that really isn't the case. There is a lot of propaganda against us, just as creationists pump out a lot of propaganda against Christians. Now, either that, or you've just listened to what some extremely bigoted anti-MRAs have on the subject. But either way, your video is a cartoon of a parody of a satire of the worst strawman arguments I've ever heard against the MRM.
Because when we have these stupid fuckers going around saying, well, men are oppressed because women aren't just bending over and letting them do whatever we want anymore, and women want rights and stuff, and I'm not okay with that. That's really what all this bullshit boils down to, is these guys are complaining that women want a say in things, and they're not okay with that. Like, women need to be barefoot pregnant in the kitchen, right? That's where they belong, or I don't even fucking know.
Now, I'm sorry, I just had to take this off because I'm getting pretty warm. But no, that's not what we're saying at all. What you're talking about there is traditionalism, which is also a huge enemy to the MRM. Now, historically, yeah, women have had it quite bad. Their political views weren't taken seriously, and it was hard for them to get respect as leaders. It arguably still is to some degree. But that is because women were overwhelmingly protected from harm at the expense of some of their agency. Now, we're against that too, but what society turns a blind eye to is that whilst women were doing the oh-so-dangerous work of cooking, cleaning, and taming savage little monsters we call children, men were dying in wars or working themselves into early graves in coal mines and making up nearly 100% of workplace fatalities. Now, if they didn't do this, they would starve to death. Now, today, we're not going to starve to death, but there is still a huge stigma towards house husbands. This is one of the main contributors towards the pay gap, which, in England at least, is virtually non-existent once you factor in hours worked and previous employment, and factors like that. You know, guys are under a lot more pressure to perform than women are. Now, feminists, and even women as a whole to some degree, they want all the privileges that men have without accepting any of the risk. That may be where you're getting the confusion there. We're arguing that, if they're going to have the privileges that men do, they need to also accept the risks which come along as well. Now, women want equal average pay, whilst at the same time they all expect to marry husbands who are earning more than them. I said all, so that was a generalisation. But yeah, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that one way or another they're going to be disappointed there.
It's like, women got the right to vote, and you had a bunch of men complaining about women are inferior, and how could they be expected to understand the complexities of political situations because they're women. And when you actually look at politics for more than half a fucking second, you realize that the only complexities here is how much lies people just tell one another and expect each other not to call them out on it.
Well, I don't know anyone in the MRM who thinks that women don't deserve the vote, so I have no idea what that's got to do with us, but you're leaving a few things out of your history there. Firstly, for the vast majority of human history, men haven't had the vote either, and it was only a very short period of time between all men getting the vote and all women getting the vote. And most of the time, when men got the vote, it was due to the fact that the government could force them to go to war and potentially die for their country. And it was argued that you can't expect people to go to war and fight for their country and potentially die if they don't have a say in how the country's run. Now, when women got the vote, they did not have the same responsibility thrust upon them, and that's kind of what we're saying. Women want the privileges that men have without expecting all of the responsibilities which come along with it. And if you're for equality, you can't have it both ways. Something else you're forgetting is that during that time there were a lot of women who thought that they shouldn't have the vote either.
I've seen the complaints from the men, oh, well, women can claim rape so much easier. Let's start with that. Let's start with that because I'm in a mood to be pissed off. Well, if it wasn't for the fact that men were doing over 90% of the raping, they almost would have a complaint, except for the fact that men are almost completely responsible for rape. So I see a problem when men argue this, which is, almost all of rape is man raping woman or men raping men, but we have a problem with the fact that men are being accused of rape so much. Well, stop raping each other. Maybe the accusations would stop if you weren't so fucking guilty. And you can say, oh, that's really harsh. Most men aren't raping people and all that. But, statistics bear out well enough, which is that most of the rapes are done by men. And this is an incredibly important thing that must be noted on when men are saying, oh, well, it's a universal problem. No, it isn't. It's not a universal problem. It's not a women raping men problem. It's not a women raping women problem. It's a men raping people problem.
Wow, where to start? So, society and academic feminists particularly ignore gay rape and pretend that lesbian rape and women raping men doesn't happen. When it comes to lesbian rape, I find this particularly disgusting because it just proves that to them, demonising men and pretending that all women are victims is more important to them than actually helping women. And we're the misogynistic ones. Now, the thing is, we don't know what the true figures are about these other forms of rape, or, even men raping women, but for the other types particularly, they are not taken seriously at all. Regardless, the numbers don't matter. Should we simply ignore trans rights because they only affect a tiny percentage of men and women? No, of course not. And, let's have a look at some of these double standards. What happens when a male teacher sleeps with a 15-year-old girl? People practically want him hanged. What happens when a female teacher sleeps with a 13-year-old boy? People think he's lucky. It's fucking amazing that any of these boys come forward at all when society has attitudes like this towards them. Now, if you've never met a sexually aggressive woman, then all I can say is you must be extremely inexperienced. As for false accusations, the studies done indicate anywhere between 1% and 90%. They are all over the place. We don't have an even remotely reliable figure at the moment, but my own meta-analysis shows that it's probably between 12 and 13% provably false, which is pretty difficult considering, I'm sure it's hard to prove a negative. The idea that, that only a tiny percentage of rape accusations are false is ludicrous to the extreme. What you'd be arguing there is basically that women are orders of magnitude less capable of lying than men are of raping. That is absurd. But yeah, I'm sure that if you were falsely accused and locked in a cell for 24 hours, had intimate samples taken, got forced to pee in a fucking cup, and had the weight of potentially going to jail over your head for a couple of months before it was dropped, you wouldn't be angry at the fact your accuser got off scot-free. No, of course not. You'd be like, well, none of this matters because most rapists are men. Bull fucking shit. This is a men's rights issue. I'll grant you that most rapists are men, but false rape allegations and rape are two completely different crimes. Most slut-shaming comes towards women, comes from other women from what I've seen. Does that mean that automatically it's not a women's issue? No. An innocent man is in no way responsible for the actions of a guilty man.
Now, another important thing is this whole idea that men have about, women are trying to take away men's rights and take away our balls and our manness or machismo something. Apparently, women asking for rights somehow removes the testicle off of men or something.
Now, this isn't something I particularly comment on, but no, it has nothing to do with women having rights. There is an element, though, of masculinity being demonised, men being shamed for being male. All men are potential rapists, macho bullshit, chauvinist pig, and things like that. Women still have women's clubs and have an identity as women. But we, as men, have allowed women into spaces where men can relate to each other as men, free of women, and allowing them in, we have allowed them to change the rules so that they feel more comfortable. No problem with women coming into male spaces, but, you don't go into somebody else's house and then start demanding that they do things the way you like it. Now, early school life is particularly bad for boys. Below secondary age, teaching is massively dominated by women, particularly due to the not-so-irrational fear of having false sex allegations made towards you. 13% of teachers, 13% of male teachers have had false allegations laid against them. That figure may not be completely accurate. I'll leave a link, but it's the most credible figure we have. That is just fucking astonishing. Now, also when it comes to childcare, the vast majority of that's done by women as well. And as a result, young boys often have no male role model in their life. Also in school, these days they're massively overprotecting children and imposing really strict safety rules, such as having to wear safety goggles when playing conkers and shit like that. And as a result, it's demonising masculinity. Any form of play which, boys like to engage in, play fighting or whatever, they're not allowed to do that. They're demonised, they're bad, and it makes school a really unpleasant place for young boys to be in. And I suspect that this has an awful lot to do with why boys are falling so badly behind in the education system. So, yeah, there is a bit of merit to that argument, but it's not something which I've particularly gone into myself.
And
they're sucking our mojo out in the night.
Please leave the laughter in.
Yes!
And yes, I do have a woman in attendance laughing at you because you're stupid. If you want to go on with this logic, you can, but be aware of the fact that the rest of us in the world are going to laugh at you and think, well, I wonder how small his penis is. I mean, if this is what he's going to devote his life to, this guy here, talk about how women are getting uppity and how he just is too 19th century to handle women having rights, then I'm going to laugh at you. And I'm going to unabashedly, unashamedly, and ridiculously laugh at you because you're silly.
Now, as I've said before, that is a huge mischaracterisation of what the men's rights movement is actually fighting for. We actually want equality. Women should have exactly the same rights men do, and the same responsibilities along with them. Now, let's go over some of these men's rights issues then, since you think they're all just really stupid. Men get longer sentences for the same crimes, even when you normalise for previous history. Male rape victims aren't given the support they deserve. Virtually zero accountability for people who give false rape allegations. Men are looked on as dangerous potential rapists or paedophiles. Courts treat us worse in cases of child custody and domestic violence. Men account for over 90% of workplace fatalities. House husbands are still looked down upon. Affirmative action helps women at the expense of equally or even more talented men. Male genital mutilation is still legal. That's 1 in 3 boys worldwide who are sexually abused, and pretty much the whole world turns a blind eye to it. Men make up the majority of prisoners, mental patients, homeless people, suicide victims, murder victims, and nearly every other form of violence bar rape and domestic violence, which are actually a hell of a lot more equal than most people are led to believe. There's plenty more, but that's a short list for you to be getting on with.
If there is a group in the world who has the least reason to complain about oppression and lack of rights and war crimes and everything else that the white male landowner has done to everybody else in the world, well, it would be the white male landowner who has no right to complain. How about that? The one perpetrating most of the acts throughout history against other people. Who'd have thought that they wouldn't have the right to complain about that?
Well, if we were calling ourselves the white male landowners, rights people, you'd have a point, but we're not. We're the men's rights activists. There's a pretty big difference. There are a hell of a lot of men who are given no help by society purely because they're male, and that is wrong. We're supposed to be fighting for equal rights here, aren't we?
I mean, everything from Native Americans. By the way, look at the particular age group that Christopher Columbus and his first settlers like to take as their comfort women, and then come back to me about men being responsible, or men being moral authorities, right? Come back to me with that after you analyze history and the actions of the people now talking about men's rights and all of that.
Okay, I think you've got a very simplistic view of human history. I'll link to my video debunking feminist theory, Patriarchy, down below. So watch that, it will go into a lot more detail than I'm going to here. But for you to believe that men have put themselves in power for their expressed benefit at the expense of women throughout all time and all cultures, you have to believe that either men are just naturally these evil, misogynistic monsters, or that women are too weak and stupid to end their own oppression, both of which are sexist as fuck, and the truth is somewhat more nuanced than that. You see, population growth is limited by the number of women. So women have automatic value based on the fact that they have a uterus. Men, on the other hand, they only have value based on the work they can do and what they can provide, and they're disposable. That's why they were the ones dying in wars and doing all of the dangerous jobs. Now, women having this automatic value, they were heavily protected, and as a result of that, they ended up losing some agency in the process. Men were encouraged to engage in high-risk activities. So that's why very occasionally, as a man, you might end up on top because, you're doing these high-risk things which can have potentially big payoffs, or you end up dead or on the bottom rung of society. Now, today's world is somewhat more fair than that. You don't have most of your children, dying before they get to the age of 5. Modern machinery has made it so that physical strength isn't needed in jobs as much today. So, there's no reason to continue male disposability or overly protecting women anymore. The world's become a lot more even. But it was that way in the past for a reason. As for, women being abducted and stuff, well, that's because women had automatic value based on the fact that they had a uterus. If you're going to steal something, are you going to steal something of low value, or are you going to steal something of high value? Now, talking about the Native Americans, that brings me on to the Iroquois. They're the closest thing which we have to a matriarchal society. They had a male chief, but he only remained in power so long as he served the needs of the women. The women were the only ones who could vote, and they could remove him from power at any time. So, although technically the man was the one in charge, the women were the ones with all the power. They abducted women too. They still had men performing lots of the dangerous work. They still had the women protected. It's not so much different. The reason patriarchies came about, it has its roots in biology, but as I've said, there's no need for it to be that way today. 2 further points then. When those women were abducted, how many men were killed in the process? You're looking at things from a completely one-sided viewpoint. The past has had its problems for both sexes, and it still does today. And one more thing, if you're going to blame men for everything bad in the world, because men were the ones in power, everything which they did, everything bad is because of them, you also have to accept by the same logic that everything good in the world was also because of men. If women were the ones in power, they'd have done good things, and they'd have done bad things as well. They're human beings with flaws just like everybody else.
Get back to me on that after you look at some history. Until then, I think it's easy enough to say that when you have a bunch of overprivileged people who do not understand the very idea of hardship, much less the realities of going through being a disenfranchised, disadvantaged minority or group without power in this world, that I think until you've gone through a little bit of that, like, I'm a white guy. I don't really know about what it's like to be a disadvantaged minority. I can't speak to that. All I can say is to the other white male people talking about how we're all disadvantaged. No, we're not. Are you kidding? We rule the world, basically. And if you try to tell me for half a moment that you are disadvantaged, I will pull my white card on you and say, shut the fuck up, because you're not.
Yeah, well, you may well have had an easy life, but you do not speak for all men. I've been laughed at by my boss after being sexually harassed for 2 years. I've had my ribs smashed and my ankles broken in industrial accidents, in jobs which I'd never have been expected to take if I was female. I've been accused of things I haven't done. I've been fucked over by the family courts. I've been through domestic violence, not hit back because men don't hit women, and not been taken seriously. And yeah, there's guys out there who have had things a shit ton worse than I have.